Daniel. I looked at Rachel, trying to process the words I had just heard. My heart pounded loudly in my chest, as if beating an alarming rhythm. Thoughts tangled into a chaotic tangle, scattering in different directions, but again and again returning to one single word. Pregnant. It sounded foreign in my head, like something distant, relating to other people's stories, but not to me. Not to us. And yet reality struck home. It was happening here, now, with us. Rachel sat across from him, nervously fiddling with the hem of her sweater sleeve. Usually her brown eyes glowed with a bold sparkle, confidence and defiance splashed in them. But now they looked scared. There were no tears, no despair, no prayer, only waiting. Anxious, painfully patient, waiting for my reaction. I ran my tongue over my dry lips, feeling the air in the room getting heavier. An invisible grip squeezed my chest, and this burden responsibility, fear, uncertainty fell with all its inevitable weight. I had no idea how to carry it. Are you sure? I finally asked, forcing myself to speak. The voice was quieter than I intended, and I hoped she didn't hear the trembling. Rachel nodded, not taking her eyes off me. Yes, she exhaled, and then, after a short pause, added, almost in a whisper, I took the test 3 times. And I went to the doctor. There can be no mistake. Her voice wavered barely noticeably, but it was enough to send an icy realization down my spine. It was for real. This could no longer change. A tense silence reigned in the room, echoing with the hum of my thoughts. Somewhere behind the wall, muffled voices could be heard. Rachel's parents were talking about something in a restrained manner, but it seemed with growing concern. I had little doubt what was being discussed. About us. About what to do now. I could imagine their serious faces, furrowed brows, worried glances that they must have exchanged. Her father, always reserved, with a deep wrinkle on his forehead, hardly expressed emotions, but was definitely seething inside. And the mother, a little more open, probably spoke louder. Her voice trembled, betraying a mixture of anxiety and disappointment. They already knew. And now, probably, they were deciding how to continue to live not only for them, but also for us. I lowered my gaze, feeling how the air around me became heavy, almost tangible. It seemed as if the walls had moved closer, compressing the space, depriving me of the opportunity to breathe deeply. We just finished our studies. Ahead is a huge world, vast, full of possibilities, promising freedom, adventure, open horizons. And suddenly this. We dreamed so much and made plans. Everything seemed possible. Reckless trips with the last of the money, bold decisions, first steps in a career, nights full of laughter and carefreeness. We could allow ourselves to live, try, make mistakes, search for ourselves. But now, I clenched my fingers, taking in the texture of the wooden table in front of me. Yes, we had sex. Uncontrollably, passionately, sometimes even thoughtlessly. It was our energy, our connection, our rebellious happiness. But marriage? I never thought about it seriously. It always seemed like something distant, something for adults, for those who have lived together for years, have settled down, are tired of looking for something new. We were together for less than a year. Nothing at all. Everything seemed so simple. Dates in a small, cozy cafe, her laughter sounding into the night as we walked along deserted streets under flashing neon signs. Parties where we danced, forgetting about time, glaring at each other with glances full of desire. And now, everything is changing. Those few words she said changed everything I knew about our future. Excitement, anxiety, dull, heavy fear squeezed my chest. Was I ready? Will I be able to cope? Can I be what she is waiting for? What she hopes to see me as? I looked at her so beautiful, so alive, but now painfully serious. There were no accusations or demands in her gaze, just waiting, and I didn't know how to say that I just didn't know what to do next. Rachel took a deep breath, her shoulders shaking as if she was about to say something. I noticed how her fingers squeezed the fabric of the sweater tighter, how her eyelashes fluttered, but she just looked away. And then everything rolled down like an avalanche, crushing my thoughts, feelings, and protests. Everything happened as if in a fog, as if someone had suddenly turned down the volume of the surrounding world. I saw her father's lips move, but the words came to me in muffled fragments, not immediately making sense. "You will get married." A simple phrase, uncompromising, said not as a proposal, but as a sentence. I blinked, trying to focus on his face. Hard features, a hard look, a voice that fills the space, leaving no room for objections. He continued to talk about family honor, about reputation, about what is right, about the fact that it is necessary. I couldn't think clearly. Everything was decided for us. My parents, Edward and Marion Clark, found out about everything a few hours later. They arrived as soon as they received the call. I saw my mother get out of the car, not immediately daring to come closer. There were tears in her eyes, those that she was holding back for now, but that were ready to spill at any moment. When she finally approached, her fingers immediately found my hands and squeezed them, clinging as if for something that could bring me back. As if you hold on tighter, everything can change. Father was different. Edward Clark knew no weakness, no doubt. He was a man of honor, a man of strict principles, and I already saw that his face did not express surprise, just cold determination. "You knew that responsibility cannot be ignored," he said calmly, without a trace of emotion. But behind this calmness lay disappointment. I didn't need to hear the accusations, they were already in the air. I knew what he was thinking. He believed in duty, in doing the right thing. In his eyes, there was no place for youthful dreams of freedom. He saw only the fact. I must correct the consequences of my actions. And I felt an invisible noose being tightened around my neck. Both families met in the living room of Rachel's house. Tension hung in the air like a thunderstorm before a storm. But no one screamed. Nobody argued. Everything was decided calmly, efficiently, and clearly. It was as if Rachel and I didn't even exist. "The wedding will be in a month. We need to choose a place. There shouldn't be too many guests, only the closest ones. Rings. I need to buy rings." They spoke as if they were discussing a business deal. Every step they took was verified. Every argument sounded convincing. I heard their voices, but they mixed into a single hum, getting lost in the emptiness of my head. I wasn't asked if I wanted it. Rachel wasn't asked either. We just sat there, watching how they gave us a date, how they assigned roles, how they built our future without us. I don't remember exactly how we ended up in the car, how the engine started, how the city lights blurred behind the glass into endless blurred stripes. I looked at them, but didn't see them. It seemed to me that I was an observer of someone else's life. It's like this isn't happening to me. It's as if it's not my fate unfolding before my eyes, but someone else's plot twist in a bad movie. All I had to do was stand in front of the altar and say the Pledge of Allegiance, an oath in which there was not a word about love. Rachel. I didn't immediately understand what happened, although the result was obvious. Cycle delay? Yes, but sometimes this happens. Change of mood? So what? Everyone has bad days. Swollen breasts? Perhaps just hormones. I found explanations, clung to every little detail, hoping that I was wrong, that everything could be attributed to something else. But the longer I tried to ignore the signs, the harder reality knocked on my mind until it finally crashed into me like an icy ocean. I am pregnant. The word lashed through my consciousness, leaving a burning trace, causing my heart to skip a beat, and then beat so fast that it became difficult to breathe. My throat was tight, my temples were pounding, and something inside me was compressed into a tight lump. The first thought flashed through my head, with all the clarity of which my shocked brain was capable. Daniel is a bastard. I clenched my fists sharply, my nails digging painfully into my palms. Anger flared up instantly. A hot wave swept through the body, spreading through the veins, filling every cell. I didn't know who to blame more, him or myself. How the hell could this happen? Panic followed, sweeping away the anger, leaving only chaos. I've always been careful. I didn't believe in fairy tales. I didn't create illusions. I knew what mistakes meant. Always, still. But here it is, reality. Not cruel, not tragic, just inevitable. It washed over me like a cold shower soaked in icy horror. I still didn't know what to do, where to run, who to tell. My head was buzzing, as if 1,000 voices were arguing at the same time, interrupting each other, pulling me in different directions, shouting so loudly that I could not make out a single word. And one thought was repeated over and over again, pulsating in time with my wildly beating heart. Damn it, I'm pregnant. The first person I told everything to was my best friend Liv. I didn't think, I didn't plan, I just dialed her number, and 20 minutes later, she was sitting in front of me, legs crossed, as if we were just discussing the latest college gossip. Liv was my complete opposite, explosive, lively, loud as a summer carnival. It seemed that everything in life was easy for her, as if she was born with an internal compass that always showed her the right path. She laughed, talked incessantly, rushed into adventures with the same reckless courage that I always lacked. We studied together, sat in her room at night, drank cheap wine, talked about life, about the future, about guys. All this seemed so far from reality. And now reality has fallen squarely on my shoulders. When I told her I was pregnant, her reaction threw me off balance. At first, she laughed, loudly, as if I had just told her a joke. "Damn, are you serious?" She exhaled, still smiling, but then looked at me carefully. Her brown eyes met mine, and after a couple of seconds, the smile disappeared. "Oh," she said, leaning closer. "Are you serious?" I just nodded silently. Liv took a deep breath, ran her fingers through her fiery red hair, twirling a strand around her finger, and then exhaled sharply and slammed her palms down on her knees. "Okay, don't panic." There was so much confidence in her voice that I almost believed that there was really no need to panic. "First of all, you tell your father about this. Secondly, to Daniel, so that he has no chance to get out." She spoke as if she already knew exactly how I should resolve the whole situation, as if all this wasn't a disaster. I nodded, but everything was trembling inside. Walter Harding, my father, a man who left no room for mistakes, a man who always made decisions for everyone. I understood perfectly well that as soon as I said these words out loud, as soon as I admitted what had happened, control over my life would completely pass into his hands. And this made me really scared. Everything went downhill further. At first, the conversation with my father was cold, calculating, without a single manifestation of emotion. Then the wedding bustle began. A meeting of families, endless discussions, arguments about the date, place, number of guests, all this flashed before me like in a kaleidoscope, too fast, too chaotic, too unreal. But what I remember most was the choice of dress. It was the only thing that didn't feel like a forced duty, that didn't feel like another step towards a life that someone had decided for me. It was something almost fun. Thanks, Liv. She dragged me into the wedding dress store with such enthusiasm as if we were going to the most important attraction in an amusement park. Anticipating a comedy show, she snapped her fingers, pointing out the most ridiculous outfits she could find. "Oh God, look," she squealed, holding up a dress with such huge frills that it resembled a 3-tiered cream cake. "All you have to do is put the cherry on your head." I rolled my eyes, but Liv was already rushing on. "And this?" She solemnly pulled out a Gothic dress with black lace, sparkling ominously in the light of the lamps from the hanger. "Ideal if you want to look like you are getting married under a contract with dark forces." Then there was a princess dress with a full skirt and pearl beads, reminiscent of an outfit from a Disney cartoon. Liv threw up her hands theatrically. "In this, you can sing about magical dreams and friendship with mice." But her real triumph came when she pulled out something dazzlingly sparkly, studded with so many rhinestones it made my eyes water. "Oh, this is it," she winked, flashing her teeth. "You wanted everything in your life to sparkle like these unexpected turns of fate." I just sighed heavily, but succumbing to her passion, I still agreed to try on several options. And in vain. One of the outfits turned out to be so tight that I literally got stuck in it. "Liv, help," I moaned, trying in vain to wriggle out of the fabric trap. But Liv couldn't help because she was crying with laughter. "The wedding has not yet taken place, and you are already trapped," she squeezed out through sobs. "Symbolic, don't you think? In the end, I settled on a classic dress, simple, elegant, not too fancy, but at least I could breathe in it. Liv looked at me for a long time and then nodded with a deliberately serious expression. Okay, you look amazing. She leaned closer and whispered conspiratorially, but remember, if someone at the wedding tries to throw rice at you, hit back. You've suffered enough already. It wasn't like a dream come true. It was a nightmare that unfolded before me with no way to wake up. I was not the hostess of this day. I didn't choose anything that would make him mine. As a child, I imagined a wedding as something magical. In my imagination, she was filled with light, love, and laughter. I saw myself in a dress that reflected my personality, surrounded by people who were genuinely happy for me, with a man with whom I was madly in love. The reality was completely different. I didn't choose my husband. I didn't choose the wedding date. I didn't decide how everything should go. Everything has already been decided for me. And now, standing in front of the mirror in a white dress, with a ring that was simply placed in my palm, I looked at my reflection and thought only about one thing. It's a very, very bad choice to have sex without protection, especially with someone you don't feel love for. This thought scratched bitterly inside, but what was the point? No amount of regret could turn back time. My fingers automatically ran over the smooth fabric of the dress. It was someone's script, someone's carefully planned celebration. What about me? I'm just a leading lady in a play for which I didn't even buy tickets. But perhaps this is fate. Perhaps this was what was meant to happen. Well, we'll have to come to terms with it and clean up the consequences of our rash actions. Wedding. What the hell am I doing here? The hall was filled with people, but I felt as if I was standing in emptiness. The aromas of flowers were in the air, muffled classical music was playing, someone was talking quietly, but it all seemed distant, blurry. It was as if I was watching this through thick glass, without any control over what was happening. It wasn't my day. It wasn't my decision. I adjusted my cuffs, trying to keep my hands busy, but even that was annoying. The suit fit perfectly, but was alien. Everything here, from the decorations to the impeccably set tables, had nothing to do with me. Just a performance. And suddenly, before I could plunge into another wave of thoughts, Liv appeared in front of me. Mischievous sparkles danced in her eyes, and a wide grin played on her lips. She came closer and, leaning towards me, whispered so that no one could hear. "Well, Dan, it turns out you're damn good in bed if you could get Rachel so quickly." No chance of escape. I exhaled heavily, rolled my eyes, and tried not to succumb to her provocation. "Liv, you have a talent for ruining people's mood." She made an innocent expression on her face, but I knew very well that she was enjoying this moment. "Come on, relax. It's not every day you get married." She patted me on the shoulder, grinned, and, still cheerful, walked away towards the guests. I looked over at Rachel. She was beautiful, impeccably beautiful. Tender, touching in this white dress, with soft curls neatly arranged around her face, with eyes in which a mixture of anxiety and humility was read. She looked almost unreal, like a porcelain doll placed on display to be admired. But she was not my woman, not the one I imagined my life with. I always thought that if I ever decided to get married, it would be different. In my dreams, my wife was different, bright, daring, self-confident, someone who would not be afraid to look into my eyes, challenging me, igniting excitement. I wanted a whirlwind, a storm, a fire that would flare up in both of us, forcing us to argue, laugh, prove that we were right, and still return to each other every time. And now, Rachel wasn't bad. She just wasn't mine. And that's the only thing that mattered now. First wedding night. The house was quiet, too quiet. The guests left, the festive noise was left behind, and now we were left alone. Alone. Among the unsorted boxes, among the smell of flowers, which no longer seemed festive, among this new life into which fate has thrown us without warning. Rachel sat slouched on the bed with her arms crossed over her chest. She looked small, tired, her white dress seemed alien, unnecessary. It was as if now that the performance was over, she wanted to just take it off and disappear. I stood in the doorway, not knowing what to say, what to do, where to put my hands. There were too many thoughts in my head. I thought about our future child. What awaits him? What kind of life will he live? I was thinking about how my plans for higher education were being put on hold indefinitely, that I urgently need a job, what you need to provide for your family. Family. The word resonated heavily in my head. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for this house, for this marriage, for this future. All I dreamed about was that I had to reassemble it, but according to a completely different scenario. Rachel looked up at me. Dan, her voice was quiet, tired. I approached. I sat down next to him. We both didn't know how to deal with it. We didn't know what our next steps would be. But one thing was clear. We'll have to figure this out together. We didn't have sex on our wedding night. No excitement, no passion, not even an attempt to pretend that there is something like desire between us. Just quiet, tense silence. We simply changed our clothes and took a shower, trying not to stare at each other, as if we were both afraid that any wrong movement would upset the already fragile balance. And then they went to bed, covered with one blanket, but remaining at a distance. I felt his warmth next to me. He is even breathing in the silence of the night. But we were too far from each other. I looked at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic sound of drops of water remaining in the pipes after the shower, and tried to imagine how our life would turn out. Will we have love? Will we ever be happy? Or will it always remain only a duty, an obligation, a compromise? Dan lay motionless next to me, but I knew he was awake. He thought so too. He, too, struggled with this new, alien, unexpected future. And perhaps, at that moment, we were closer than ever before. Our house was not really ours. My parents paid half the cost their way of making sure we didn't stray from the path they had outlined for us. The rest was to be paid to us. This meant loans, bills, jobs we weren't ready for. But we had no choice. I tried to convince myself that this house was the start of something good. That one day it will become cozy, it will become ours. I bought furniture, chose colors for the walls, mentally arranged photographs that we didn't have yet. But the most important thing was the nursery. I looked at the empty room and tried to imagine what it would be like. Child. We went to the ultrasound together. The doctor smiled and said, "Congratulations, you are having a girl." I looked at the screen where a blurry projection of a small creature was moving inside me. I looked and felt a lump in my throat. But the real shock was on Dan's face. He looked at the monitor with some kind of childish delight. His lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. There was a dreaminess in his eyes. I've never seen him like this. And at that moment, for the first time, I thought that maybe something good was waiting for us. But reality returned too quickly. No matter how much I wanted to linger in that moment when we looked at the ultrasound screen, when the very expression that instilled timid hope in me appeared in Dan's eyes, all this could not stop life. We had to discuss his work. We were sitting at dinner, the food was cooling on the plates, but I had no time to taste it. "Dan, we need to decide what you're going to do," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He didn't answer right away. He just turned the fork in his hand, looking at one point in front of him. "I know," he finally said, "but I wanted to finish my studies. I understand." And I really understood. I knew how important his studies were to him, how he dreamed of a career, of a future that had now become blurry and uncertain. But we didn't have time to dream. We will have expenses. The child will need everything: clothes, a crib, diapers, a stroller. "We need money, Dan." He was silent, but I saw his fingers grip the fork so tightly that his knuckles turned white. I knew how difficult it was for him. I knew how hard it was to realize that your dreams no longer belong to you, that now they are forced to give way to reality. But there was no choice. "I'll find something," he finally breathed. "But, Rachel, I need time." I sighed. She nodded. It's a pity that we didn't have time. It was not just difficult, it was almost impossible. Every day I scrolled through vacancies, went to advertisement sites, and sent dozens of resumes. At first I searched by specialty, hoping that at least somewhere there would be a place for an aspiring engineer. But reality hit hard. No one wanted to hire me without experience. Every interview turned into the same scenario. I was sitting in a stuffy office. Opposite me was a company representative, looking over my resume with an indifferent look. The questions sounded mechanical. What work experience do you have? Well, just an internship. You see, we are looking for a specialist with practical skills. 2 years of work experience. We will contact you. But they didn't contact me. I began to realize that my dreams of a successful career were being put on hold indefinitely. And at some point, I had to leave pride aside and look for what was available, although far from my ambitions. I ended up getting a job at a fiberglass plant. It didn't sound so bad, line operator, seemed like something technical and responsible, but in reality, it meant hard physical labor. I got up in the dark when the city was still sleeping, when the air was saturated with silence and cold. I got to the industrial zone on an old bus, which smelled of dampness and machine oil. My work overalls were raw and my boots felt incredibly heavy, but a few minutes into my shift, I didn't think about it anymore. Machines rattled in the workshop. The air was thick with dust, hot glass, and resin. My eyes stung from the chemicals, my hands hurt from endlessly carrying heavy materials. The heat and noise pressed from all sides, sweat flowed down my back, turning the fabric of my overalls into a second skin. After the first shift, I barely made it home, literally falling off my feet. But I knew that giving up work was not an option. They didn't pay much, but it was stable. We had enough to pay bills, eat, and save for the child. Every week I received my salary in an envelope, and the first thing I did was set aside some of it for savings. I came home tired, broken, my hands were buzzing, my muscles were aching, but I stuck to this job. I saw how Rachel tried to make it cozy, how she sorts through boxes of children's clothes, carefully running her fingers over the tiny onesies, how he spends hours leafing through furniture catalogs, choosing a crib, changing tables, and night lights. She didn't complain, but I saw that it was not easy for her. She counted every purchase too carefully and put things off for later too often. And I hated myself for not being able to give her more yet. Of course, there was no need to talk about our sex life during this period. I was exhausted at work for days, and the fact that she was pregnant made me afraid that I might somehow harm her. This happened rarely, not too romantically, and mostly only to get rid of a physiological need. When our daughter Amora was born, I realized she is my motivation. I looked at this little bundle, at her incredibly tiny fingers, at her plump cheeks, at her quiet breath felt on my shoulder, and I felt how the world around me was changing. Her name meant love, and it was the only word that could describe my feelings for her. When I held her for the first time, everything inside turned upside down. Everything that previously seemed important, study, career, even my anger at the current situation disappeared. Only she remained. I suddenly realized that there was nothing wrong with hard work if it allowed her to grow in peace and security. If for her sake I have to work until exhaustion, get up before dawn, forget about my dreams, so be it. I agreed to endure everything. Life went on as usual. We were getting used to the new schedule. Sleepless nights when Amora cried, and we took turns rocking her to sleep, whispering to her. Work that now seemed not a punishment, but a necessity. Taking care of a child in which we learned to be parents, making mistakes, being nervous, but still trying our best. Things weren't always easy in our home, but now I had a reason to fight. And this is the reason I slept in her crib, squeezing my thumb with her tiny fingers. When Amora was 6 months old, we got a neighbor. His name was Thomas. He was 10 years older than us, always elegantly dressed, with a slight smile and the relaxed look of a man who knows what he wants. Intelligent, educated, and judging by his car, he has money. We met when I was repairing a fence, and he came over to offer help. I hope you don't mind some good advice, he smiled. It depends, I answered, wiping sweat from my forehead. For example, if you stretch the mesh not over dry poles, but after rain, it will not crack. Simple physics. I looked at him, not knowing whether he was joking or being serious, but I decided to try. Indeed, the mesh lay smoother. This is how our friendship began. Thomas was different from most men I knew. He was smart, reserved, but at the same time cheerful. Unlike others, he did not look at me with pity or superiority. On the contrary, he was interested in my life and asked about my daughter, how I was coping with work. He often came to visit us, and he always managed to diffuse the situation between me and Rachel. At first, everything developed according to the usual scenario. Dan worked from morning to night, came home exhausted, but always found the strength to go to Amora's crib, take her in his arms, and gently stroke her tiny back. I furnished the house, filling it with little things that made the space cozy. She chose new curtains, rearranged furniture, and carefully laid out toys, even if Amora was too small to play with them yet. And Liv remained that same whirlwind of chaos and bright colors that burst into my life, not allowing me to completely dissolve in the routine silence of motherhood. She often came to visit, sat down on the sofa with a cup of coffee, and began to talk about everything that was happening in the world. Her stories were bright, noisy, full of detail, about new parties, about people I once knew, but now saw only through her words, about spontaneous trips that she arranged at the snap of her fingers. Sometimes I laughed listening to her crazy stories. But sometimes her words cut deeper than she could have imagined. They reminded me that my life was now limited, that I missed it all. I didn't complain. I loved my daughter. But sometimes I desperately wanted to escape, at least for a little while. One day, over a cup of coffee, Liv suddenly changed the topic of conversation. "Well, how are things with you and Dan?" A sly grin touched her lips, and mischievous interest flashed in her eyes. I immediately understood where she was going. "In what sense?" I asked, although the answer was already obvious. Liv leaned closer, as if she was about to tell an important conspiracy secret. "Well, you understand. He finally remembered that you are not just the mother of his child, but also a woman? Or is he still too tired?" I grinned, pretending that her words didn't hurt me. But inside, everything shrank. Before giving birth, I understood why he did not initiate intimacy. He worked until exhaustion. He was afraid of harming me or the child. But now Amora has already been born. What's the problem now? I always knew that he didn't love me. This was not a revelation for me. But did that mean he shouldn't want me? Where's the passion? Where are his male instincts when there is a young, beautiful female body next to him? I swirled the spoon in my cup, watching the coffee slowly swirl in time with my thoughts. "To be honest, Liv, I'm starting to doubt myself as a woman," I finally admitted, without even looking up. Liv pursed her lips. She looked at me carefully, and in her gaze one could read sympathy that was unusual for her. "Nonsense." Her voice sounded firm. "You look amazing, even after giving birth." Maybe he just needs to be reminded that his wife is not just for home comfort. Buy something sexy and show her what you can do. I sighed, staring at my cup. Good advice. I smiled bitterly. Just for what? There is already little money. Liv didn't say anything, but there was understanding in her eyes. I was silent. Dan tried. But why didn't he want me? One day Liv came to visit and literally froze on the threshold when she saw our new neighbor. She slowly raised her eyebrow, crossed her arms over her chest, and with an expression of lively curiosity stared at Thomas, who at that moment was helping me carry heavy bags of groceries into the house. Tall, strong, with light, careless stubble and an open smile, Thomas looked as if he had been pulled out of an advertisement about reliable men who are always ready to help. Liv couldn't help but notice this. "Okay, stop. Who is this?" she asked, narrowing her eyes suspiciously. I glanced at her briefly as I continued to arrange my shopping on the kitchen table. "This is Thomas, Dan's friend," I answered as calmly as possible. But I saw Liv lean forward, like a predator sensing prey. "Dan's friend?" She drawled with a hint of obvious skepticism. I nodded, trying not to react to her tone. Sometimes it helps. If Dan works on the weekend, he can babysit Amora while she naps and I run to the store. Liv chuckled. Hmm. She bit her lip, looking Thomas carefully from head to toe, and then turned her gaze to me. The corners of her lips twitched as if she was trying to hold back a grin. Interesting friend. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Very, very interesting. I shook my head, pretending that her hints didn't make any sense. When Liv left, Thomas grinned and looked at me as he poured himself some tea. Your friend is energetic, he remarked, sitting down opposite her. I sighed and shook my head. You don't know the half yet, I answered, stirring the sugar in my cup with a smile. Thomas took a sip, looking thoughtfully at me over the rim of the cup. She clearly didn't approve of my presence, he said with a slight sneer. Liv's just, Liv. It's hard to explain, I shrugged. But don't worry, if she doesn't like something, she'll say so directly. And in the face. Thomas laughed, leaning back in his chair. At that moment, the door opened and Dan entered the room. He looked tired, but a slight smile played on his lips when he looked at the stroller with his daughter. Then he glanced at us. Is dinner ready yet? Or is this a tea party for the elite? I shrugged, and Thomas just smiled back. I invited him to stay for tea since he helped me with the shopping, I said calmly, looking at Dan. Then stay for dinner, he suggested, now addressing Thomas directly. He did not refuse, and soon we were sitting at the table, and for the first time in a long time, a real warm atmosphere was felt in the house. During the meal, the conversation flowed easily, as if there were no difficulties between us. Thomas told stories about work and funny incidents with neighbors, Dan joked from time to time, and I just enjoyed a rare moment of ease. But as always, the conversation soon shifted in an unexpected direction. This girl is a pure hurricane in a miniskirt, Thomas grinned, taking a sip of tea. I don't think I could withstand such a storm for long. I froze, not immediately understanding who they were talking about. But Dan smiled and chuckled. Oh yes, Liv is a special case. But you know, sometimes such fire is really missing in life. I felt something clench inside. What was that? Jealousy? Resentment? Envy? I didn't show it, but his words stuck in my head like a thorn. I devoted all my free time to Amora. She became the center of my universe. Every glance of hers, every wave of her tiny fingers, every fleeting smile in a dream filled me with meaning that I did not know before. After an exhausting day of work, when my muscles ached from fatigue and my head was buzzing from the noise of the workshop, I still found strength. I took her in my arms, felt her tiny, warm body, her even, calm breathing, and the whole world around fell silent. I whispered something quiet and soothing to her, told her how much I loved her, and promised that I would always be there. Her tiny fingers clung to my thumb with such amazing strength, as if she already knew that I would never leave her. I could watch her fall asleep for hours, snoring peacefully on my chest. And at these moments, it seemed that nothing in life could be more important. Sometimes I came home so exhausted that it seemed like I didn't even have the strength to take off my shoes. I sat on the edge of the bed, running my hair through my fingers, feeling the weight of the day pressing on my shoulders. But as soon as I heard her voice, as soon as I saw how she smiled, recognizing me, the fatigue disappeared. Her eyes reflected purity and sincerity, and this gave me the strength to continue, despite everything else. Soon I was given additional shifts at work. The plant received a new large contract, and the management decided that now everyone should give their all. I was left with no choice. I began to stay late, come home late, sometimes no longer feeling my own legs. I explained to Rachel that this was necessary, that there was no other way, that this was not my whim, but a necessity. But she didn't seem to want to hear it. From that moment on, everything went wrong. Rachel started causing scandals literally out of the blue. She was annoyed by my absence. It was annoying that I came in tired. It was annoying that I couldn't give her as much attention as she would like. She became increasingly cold, made cutting remarks more and more often, and criticized me more and more persistently as a man. She hinted that I didn't earn enough, that it wasn't enough, that she didn't want to count every penny. She knew I was doing my best. But this was not enough. The worst part was when it happened in front of Liv. Liv was adding fuel to the fire. She grinned, exchanged glances with Rachel, and made sarcastic comments that made the situation even more tense. "Maybe you should find a second job, Dan, or already the third," she said, twirling a glass of wine in her hands. Or when Rachel started arguing with me in a raised voice, Liv would theatrically roll her eyes, as if she were watching a very boring drama, and say with false concern, "Okay, Rachel, don't be so strict." "He's trying, as much as possible." I saw her smile. I saw how much she liked this performance. I didn't know what pissed me off more, the fact that Liv was enjoying this show or the fact that Rachel was allowing her to. And then one evening, I couldn't stand it. Another pointless argument. More accusations. More evil words flying at me like knives in the back. Before this, I was always silent. He simply swallowed, turned away, and retreated into himself. But this time, "Do you think it's only my fault that you got pregnant so early?" I burst out, not believing that I was finally saying this out loud. Rachel froze, but I didn't stop. "Do you think it was only me who was irresponsible?" Anger blazed in my chest, pulsating in my temples. "I didn't have sex with you without your consent. You were there too. You wanted it too." I saw her face turn pale and a shock flash in her eyes, but I couldn't stop. "And if my memory serves me right, you also felt good. That's why you, like me, didn't remember about condoms." Silence. Thick, intense, almost tangible. We are both to blame for where we are now. I exhaled harshly, clenching my fists. Rachel didn't say a word. And then I finished her off with the last blow. "Do you think I wanted this?" I smiled bitterly, but there was no joy in this laugh. "Do you think I dreamed of giving up my plans? Killing ourselves at the factory so that we can barely make ends meet?" Rachel looked away, but I still saw her face. I, too, became a prisoner of this whole ridiculous situation. I blurted it out like a shot, as an indisputable fact that cannot be disputed. But then I took a deep breath, looked her straight in the eyes, and he said the most important thing. "But do you know what I don't regret?" She blinked, tensely waiting for an answer. "About our daughter." Her lips trembled. "The only thing we did really well was Amora." I took a step back, feeling the anger slowly drain away, leaving devastation in its wake. She is the only one connected with love in this story. Another mistake in my life. I didn't wait for her answer. He grabbed his jacket. He jerked the door open, came out. I needed to exhale, clear my head, forget myself for a minute. But instead, I ended up in a bar. I drank. A lot. Too much. The whiskey burned my throat, but that wasn't enough. Alcohol did not suppress disappointment, anger, and resentment. And then Liv showed up. I don't remember how it happened. Another glass. Conversations, laughter, echoes of anger and bitterness. Her hand is on mine. Her look is full of challenges. And at some point, I just stopped thinking. I woke up in the morning with a heavy head and a strange smell on the sheets. Darkness in the room. Light traffic nearby. I understood immediately. Every cell in my body screamed that I had made a mistake. Huge. Incorrigible. I carefully climbed out of bed, trying not to wake Liv. Every sound was deafening. Every step is treacherously loud. I pulled on my clothes and took a quick look at her. Liv was sleeping, innocent, calmly, and hell was burning inside me. There was dead silence in the kitchen. I poured black coffee, but couldn't drink it. With a trembling hand, he took a pen and a piece of paper. And he wrote, "Liv, our night was a mistake. I beg you, don't say anything to Rachel. It will kill her. I'm sorry." Leaving the note on the table, I left the apartment, feeling guilt squeezing my chest, not allowing me to breathe deeply. He left. The door slammed shut, leaving behind a quiet echo of emptiness. And I was left alone. I spent the entire night sobbing with my face buried in my pillow, trying not to wake Amora. I understood that he was right, but it didn't make it any easier for me. There was too much pain boiling inside me, too many unspoken words, too many unfulfilled hopes. I knew Dan didn't love me, and I didn't expect his love. But I just needed support. Not a roommate, not a housemate, and a man who would make me feel alive, which would make me feel like a woman. 3 a.m. He's gone. The silence pressed on my chest, preventing me from breathing. My heart sank in anxiety. Where is he? What if he doesn't come back? And if he comes back, what then? 5 a.m. I finally dozed off, hugging Amora tightly. Sleep came instantly, like salvation after a long, painful night. He was strange, but beautiful. I stood in a white dress, light, airy, as if woven from a dream. There were flowers, music, guests all around. Their faces were blurred by the light, but I knew they were happy for me. There is a man next to me, but I didn't see his face. I just felt it. Love. Pure, unconditional, all-consuming. It was the same feeling that I had dreamed of all my life. But suddenly, everything changed. I started looking around. Something's wrong. Where is Amora? Panic gripped me as if an icy wave had completely covered my heart. I looked for her with my eyes, but she was not there. Amora. A scream escaped from my throat, filled with horror and despair. I woke up abruptly. My heart was pounding wildly, echoing loudly in my chest. I frantically clenched my hands around the small, warm body. She was here, near. Her smooth, peaceful breathing was the only sound in the room. I took a deep breath, feeling the tremors slowly leave my body. It was just a dream, but its echoes will haunt me for a long time. The sound of a key in the door lock made me flinch, like a gunshot in the silence. A chill ran down my spine, my fingers clenched into a fist. Dan is back. I jumped out of bed, my heart pounding wildly, drowning out my breathing. A painful tension spread in my chest. During the night, I replayed our meeting in my head so many times. So many times I imagined how I would look into his eyes, how quietly, with a trembling voice, I would whisper, "Forgive me, Dan." I believed that I could fix everything. But as soon as I saw him, the world cracked. He closed the door behind him and threw the keys on the nightstand without looking at me. His shoulders slumped slightly, his gait was absent-minded, as if he was walking through the house mechanically, without thinking, without realizing where he was. But that wasn't the main thing. Scent. The thick, tart smell of alcohol mixed with something else. Something subtle, sweet, familiar. I froze, and suddenly, as if by a click, my memory helpfully pushed this aroma out of the depths. Perfume Live. Rare, expensive, memorable. My lips trembled and tightened. Ice ran through my veins, burning from the inside. Coincidence? No. Can't be. A trembling ran through the body, not from fear, not from pain, but from a wave of rage. A lump stuck in my throat, my breathing became short and irregular. The heart no longer beats in fear. It knocked in anger. Pain, sharp, burning, like a dagger stuck in the back. Resentment, thick, viscous, spreading through the veins, squeezing the chest. Anger, cold, icy, crystal clear. Disgust, to the fingertips, to the very essence. I looked at him and understood. I no longer want to ask for forgiveness. My heart was beating with pain, but along with this pain, an elusive determination arose in me, a quiet but inexorable voice that demanded, "You deserve better." His eyes were closed, as if he was hiding behind his fears and regrets, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the strength to say, "Enough." I remembered our first days fiery, bright, full of dreams and laughter, when the future seemed limitless. But years of compromises, tears, and endless evasive apologies gradually turned these dreams into shadows, dissolved in the silence of nights filled with the smell of someone else's perfume. Now this room, saturated with the aroma of alcohol and Liv's perfume, seemed to me a labyrinth of deception in which I no longer wanted to wander. My fingers involuntarily clenched into a fist, and I quietly but firmly said, "Dan, I'm tired. I'm tired of the pain, of the tears, of the fact that every time I have to apologize for what I am, for what I feel." His voice, once so confident, faded under the weight of silence. There was no spark in his eyes, there was no fire that once illuminated our happy moments. I knew that this relationship had become an endless cycle without mutual hope and understanding. I looked around the room. where on the walls hung memories of our best days, photographs of smiles, capturing moments of tenderness and happiness. Now they seemed like ghosts of a long-gone love, an echo of those times when I believed that I could love and be loved. But today I only felt a chill of resentment and fatigue from other people's expectations. A thought arose in my soul. For whose sake do I continue to endure? For whose sake do I allow myself to dissolve in this darkness? The look of my little Amora, quiet and innocent, reminded me that a child deserves to see a strong, confident mother, not the one who constantly asks for forgiveness for other people's mistakes. I took a step forward, my legs trembled, but each step became more and more decisive. An understanding began to grow inside me. I no longer have to be the one who swallows grievances, who makes sacrifices again and again for the sake of the illusion of a happy family. This pain pierced me like ice, but along with it, hope for freedom arose for a new life, where my desires and feelings would matter. Daniel, we need to talk. Daniel. I stood at the threshold of our house, feeling my heart squeezing doom in my chest. The smell of alcohol and foreign perfume still pierced my nostrils, mixing with shame, guilt, and that dull despair that seemed to grip every cell of my body. It seemed to me that I was a thief who had penetrated my own life. Everything around me was familiar: the walls, the corridor, the soft lighting of the lamp above the front door, and I did not feel the right to be here. Through the darkness, I noticed Rachel's outline. She stood just a few steps away, her back tense and her fists clenched. Everything was clear in her posture: resentment, anger, bitterness, disappointed hopes. It seemed that the very air between us was saturated with tension, which vibrated like a stretched string. One careless word, and it will burst, releasing all the bitterness at once. Silence has never seemed so loud to me. I couldn't bring myself to take a single step. I couldn't find the words. My throat was constricting. My pulse was pounding in my temples. My arms hung helplessly along my body. It was that second of timelessness when everything was decided. And it was then that I realized that my next phrase, any sound, any movement would completely change our lives. I understood that there was no point in inventing excuses. There are already too many lies and omissions between us, enough to destroy the remaining crumbs of trust. Rachel clenched her fists even tighter, and her eyes darted to my hair, to the collar of my jacket. She was looking for confirmation of her worst guesses. Her eyes reflected the prickly awareness that I belonged to someone else that night. And with this realization, I saw something break inside her. You. She didn't finish, as if the words were stuck in her throat. But I didn't need her to finish the sentence. Everything was clear. I stepped deeper into the hallway, feeling the floor creaking treacherously under the weight of my guilt. I wanted to look away, to avoid this direct, piercing pain that shone in her eyes, but I forced myself to look. When you make mistakes, the only way to redemption is to face the truth. I was with Liv, I finally said. The voice sounded muffled, almost a whisper, but in the silence it echoed loudly. Surprisingly, it was at that moment that I felt something like relief. The words I was so afraid of were spoken out loud. Now it is no longer possible to hide or escape from them. They are real. And just as real is the pain that is slowly tearing us both apart. Rachel's lips twitched. I saw her close her eyes for a split second, as if she was mentally trying to convince herself not to burst into tears. Perhaps some part of her hoped until the last that this was all an erroneous guess. But this second turned out to be a short moment. She opened her eyes, and so many emotions were mixed in her gaze that I could not bear. I wanted to say, "It was an accident, it won't happen again," but I knew it was much deeper. Accident? No, this is not an accident. You can kiss by accident, make a mistake in a fit of passion. But night with another woman, my friend, it's not just wrong address. This was a consequence of my weakness, my fatigue, my rebellion against my own expectations. But how to say this out loud without sounding pathetic and hypocritical? "I'm sorry," I only squeezed out, realizing that this word was too small, too insignificant to drown out her pain. Rachel raised her head, and something akin to contempt flashed in her gaze. Maybe we both didn't want to notice it, but we never had real feelings. There was a passion once, and the daughter remained, who became the only real manifestation of love between us. In all other respects, we were drowning in everyday life, irritation, resentment, and mutual reproaches. I sighed, leaning heavily on the wall, as if my inner strength had left me. I know there's nothing left between us, I admitted, and it's driving me crazy, Rachel. All I clung to, all I held on to was our daughter, but that doesn't justify what I did. She listened with her arms crossed over her chest, her face seemingly petrified. I noticed this reaction in her when she tried to hide her own weakness. The stronger the pain, the harder her gaze became. "You think I didn't hold on for Amora's sake?" she asked quietly. "Do you think I didn't understand that we were playing at being a family while we were both burning with discontent, resentment, and melancholy?" I listened silently, watching as a faint trembling ran through her shoulders. Once upon a time, it seemed to me that we would get used to it. We would just try. But life turned out to be more complicated. A whole wall has grown between us. And now, recognizing my betrayal, I saw that this wall had long ago split, and through the cracks all our mutual claims poured out. We stood there in oppressive silence, broken only by a quiet rustle. Amora probably stirred in her crib, although she did not cry. I heard her presence in everything, felt her tiny, but so important waves of life emanating from the room. "What's next?" I asked, finally plucking up the courage to ask the question that was still hovering between us. Rachel smiled bitterly. "Are you asking me?" Her voice sounded squeezed, as if with all her strength. "But just a couple of hours ago, I was going to talk to you, apologize for all my antics, and try to fix something. I thought that we needed a frank conversation, maybe even to go to a psychologist. And now, I found out that you spent the whole night in my best friend's bed." The blows continued to fall. And what could I say? Admit that this is a disaster. Yes, we both saw it. But I had to speak. I had to explain what I myself did not fully understand. "Listen," I came a little closer, trying to speak as calmly as possible, even though everything inside was feverish. "We're both unhappy. From the very beginning of our marriage, I married you because I thought it was right. It would be honest in front of our parents, in front of the very fact of pregnancy. But we were young then. Yes, and I didn't know what mature love meant. And I didn't recognize it," she added sarcastically, but there was fatigue in her voice, not aggression. "I didn't recognize it," I admitted bitterly. "Perhaps if we both understood at that moment that marriage is not a ceiling of other people's grievances, not a way to correct a mistake, but a union of two loving hearts, we would not have had all this drama. But what happened happened." I took a deep breath, feeling my throat tighten with tears. It's stupid, of course, to cry when it's your own fault, but everything that happened hit my nerves, broke my soul out. "I don't want to live a lie, Rachel," I said softly but firmly. "I know you're tired too. Yes, we both gave up, and I'm not going to justify myself. But damn, let's be honest. We never loved each other." She nodded slowly, and in this gesture I saw both sadness and release. It was as if we were both finally saying out loud the forbidden confession we had been hiding from all this time. "What should we do?" Her question hung in the air just like mine. "We cannot continue to deceive ourselves." "But what about Amora?" And here my heart sank inside me. "Daughter, the only bright thing that was born in our union. She should stay with both parents," I whispered. "But Rachel, you and I. Apparently, it's time for us to go our separate ways." I myself said these words. "It's time for us to go our separate ways." And as soon as they left my lips, I felt as if the abyss under my feet had become even deeper. Yes, this decision had been brewing for a long time, but it was scary to admit it. Partly because we didn't know how to move on with our lives, how to raise Amora, and also because the end of something big is always a step into the unknown. Rachel silently pressed her hands to her chest, as if trying to stop shaking. I saw tears glistening in the corners of her eyes, ready to fall at any second. "I don't want Amora to live in an environment of constant quarrels," she whispered. "I don't want her to see how you and I suffer and pretend that everything is fine." It's better to let her grow up with loving parents, but separately. Our eyes met. I felt a strange feeling of unity. We finally thought alike, at least in this. Amora deserved peace and love. We have to give it to her, even if we can't be together. I stepped towards Rachel and gently took her hands. She did not pull away, but her fingers were cold, as if during a bitter winter. I will try to do everything to support you. I faltered, admitting with a sad smile, us, not anymore. Support you and our daughter, financially, morally as best I can. But it's really better for us to separate. She nodded, and her tears finally broke through. She didn't cry out loud, drops just flowed down her cheeks, leaving wet trails. A sharp feeling of guilt pierced me. Whatever our marriage is, she is the mother of my child. Once upon a time, we were young and reckless, we laughed, we made plans for the future. We stood there for a while, just silently digesting the decision. It seemed that the house itself was breathing with us, saturated with the finality of this moment. Rachel reluctantly pulled one hand away and brushed away her tears. I want to move in with my parents for a while, at least for the first time. There is a separate room there, I can fill out documents and all that. She looked at me as if she was asking permission or waiting for objections. But I understood that depriving her of her parents' support now would be real cruelty. Okay, I answered, feeling a bitter wave rising inside. You'll take Amora, and you'll tell me if you need any help. I'll come whenever you want. The first days after the breakup, or neither, were, perhaps, the hardest in my life. Waking up to an empty house, without Rachel's voice, without Amora's quiet cooing, hit me harder than I expected. Now there is silence, deafening, ringing silence. I understood that it would be better for everyone, but damn, I felt unbearably empty. Every morning I caught myself thinking that I wanted to hear her voice, even in reproaches. I got used to them as part of our life. And most importantly, I missed my daughter, who was no longer around. Rachel moved in with her parents, and I later learned that they were upset but not surprised. Apparently, they had long understood that our marriage was bursting at the seams. Thomas tried to support me. It's not that I was delighted with communication after my night with Liv. I basically had a hard time with any contact with people. Guilt and shame hung over me like a dark cloud. But Thomas, like no one else, knew how to talk calmly and to the point. Perhaps at his age, he has already learned to see further than we, who are still fixated on our emotions. Thomas listened attentively, leaning his elbows on the table. I always liked that he didn't interrupt and didn't give advice until I asked. I've been working at the factory for almost a year now, I continued. It's stable, of course, but I feel like I'm ruining my health there without much prospects. I had a dream to finish my studies, become an engineer, and work in a normal company. I want to try to go towards my dreams again, or at least find a job where my brain will be used and not just my hands. Thomas averted his gaze to the window, where the weak morning sun illuminated the sill, causing the dusty light to dissipate in soft streaks. You know, I have some connections, he said after a short pause. My friend is the head of a company that deals with technological developments, including automation of production processes. They often need promising guys who are ready to learn and work. It doesn't mean you'll be hired at the snap of a finger, but I can talk to him. Something stirred inside me, as if a small flame of hope had been lit. I straightened up a little, as if receiving an energy charge. Seriously, wouldn't that be too much to ask? No, Thomas smiled, his signature calm smile. I automatically ran my hand through my hair, trying to comprehend that this could really be my chance. Thank you. Thank you so much, Thomas. I really appreciate it. He nodded, and I noticed a thoughtful look in his eyes. Perhaps at that second, I could have guessed what other thoughts were spinning in his head, thoughts about Rachel, but neither he nor I began to raise this topic. When Rachel and I announced our separation, only the two of us knew about the night with Liv and, naturally, Liv. Rachel's parents didn't ask for details, and neither did mine. Perhaps they guessed that I had done something nasty, but no one wanted to go deeper. Liv herself initially disappeared from my field of vision, as if she had evaporated. I only heard from friends that she continues to lead her flamboyant lifestyle, goes to parties, appears here and there. But one day she called me herself. It was late in the evening. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, hoping to distract myself, when the screen lit up with her name. I didn't know what to tell her, but I answered anyway. "Hi, Dan," came a familiar voice, slightly hoarse after, apparently, another party. "We need to talk." Everything inside me sank. No matter how much I repented of what happened, I knew that both of them participated in the betrayal. And I couldn't blame her for my mistakes. We agreed to meet in the park neutral territory where there will be no prying eyes. The weather was cool, autumn was beginning to take its toll. Yellow leaves were falling from the trees, rustling underfoot. I arrived a little earlier and, with my hands in my pockets, looked at the black surface of the pond. Liv appeared in her usual style, a bright coat, a short skirt, and high boots. Yes, she was always daring, always attracting glances. She saw me, froze for a moment, then came closer, biting her lip. "Hello," she said quietly. I nodded, not daring to look her straight in the eyes. Too many things overwhelmed me: shame, guilt, irritation with myself. We were silent for a couple of minutes, then she exhaled loudly. "I heard that you and Rachel broke up. I feel guilty." I turned my head towards her and noticed how she shifted from foot to foot, as if looking for where to put her hands. "Listen, Liv," I began, finally collecting my thoughts. "Our breakup was inevitable, and it's not just that night, it was the last straw. I don't want to shift the blame, but our relationship with her was already on the brink." She nodded, realizing that I was telling the truth. But I saw something else in her eyes, something that made me tense. "Dan," she licked her lips and looked around. I want to tell you the truth. About your feelings." I went cold. I think I knew where this conversation was going, but I didn't want to hear it. "Liv, don't," I muttered, feeling panic rising inside me. But she had already taken a step forward, getting closer so that I could smell her perfume. The same one that stayed on my shirt that night. I know I behaved disgustingly. That she slept with her best friend's husband. I never considered myself a proper girl. But her voice trembled and her eyes sparkled. "I felt something for you for a long time, and it was stronger than me. I understood that you were married, that it was wrong, but I wanted you. And now that you and Rachel have broken up." She didn't finish, but in her gaze there was an unambiguous proposal. "Let's be together." I felt everything twist in my chest. On the one hand, feeling guilty before Rachel, before Amora, did not give me any right to happily dive into a new relationship. On the other hand, I couldn't deny that there had always been a spark of physical attraction between Liv and me. But now I could no longer act, giving in only to passion. This led to disaster one day. "Liv," I sighed, trying to remain calm. "I'm not ready for anything more right now. Honestly, I need to sort myself out." "Yes, and—" Liv looked down, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. For the first time in my life, I saw her so vulnerable without a mask of insolence and laughter. She swore in a whisper, smiling bitterly. "It's all kind of stupid. I'm sorry for dumping my feelings on you like that. I just didn't know how else to say it." I didn't answer. And what can we say? We both understood that this was not the moment when we could easily start something new. "Maybe over time," she added quietly, as if clinging to a ghostly hope. I didn't answer. We just stood there like two lost people, each with their own wound. And I knew that time would put everything in its place. If there is anything else between us, let life itself decide. But now, I was empty and broken. Thomas turned out to be a reliable word in practice. A week later, he called and said that he had arranged an interview with me. The company was called Techmark Solutions, and I had no idea what to expect. I didn't have a complete higher education, only an incomplete one, plus an internship. But damn, I also had a frantic motivation to prove that I was capable of more than carrying heavy boxes at a factory. On the day of the interview, I felt my heart pounding as if I was going to my first exam at university. In the reception area, everything looked strict, modern. Employees scurried back and forth, looking at their phones or laptops. I sat there, nervously twitching my ankle, trying to look confident, although I was in a storm inside. Finally, I was invited into the office. A man of about 40 was sitting at the table, with a pleasant smile and a tenacious gaze. His name was Harry. He looked at my documents, listened to my brief story about how I almost completed my engineering studies, how I had an internship at a small company, but then got married and went to work at a factory. Harry asked a couple of clarifying questions and then looked me straight in the eyes. "I won't lie, we usually hire people with a diploma," he said. "But Thomas, whom I respect, says that you have potential and that you are ready to learn. Plus, you're familiar with production from the inside. This can be useful if you quickly get into new technologies." I nodded, trying to keep my face calm. Everything inside was seething with thoughts. "Please take me, give me a chance." "So," Harry continued, "I propose the following option. We accept you for a probationary period. For 6 months, you will participate in projects as an assistant engineer. At the same time, we will help you with some training materials and test your skills. And if you can handle it, you can become a full-fledged specialist." Everything inside me was jubilant. I almost exhaled with a hiss of relief. "I agree," I blurted out, unable to contain my smile. Harry smiled back and extended his hand to me. "Welcome to Techmark Solutions." I left the building with the feeling that the world had slightly expanded its boundaries, allowing me into a brighter future. Of course, now I have to work and study much harder because 6 months will fly by quickly and I only have one chance. But I was ready. I'm ready to work hard just to prove to myself and everyone around me that I'm worth something. And first of all, to his daughter. While I was getting a new job, Rachel and I lived our lives separately, but with common points of intersection. Amora. I tried to take her to my place on weekends, or at least for a day when I could find time. It was difficult at first. She missed her familiar surroundings and sometimes cried when I picked her up from Rachel's parents' house. But gradually I got used to it. I realized that Mom and Dad now live in different places, but they both love her. Sometimes I saw her looking at me with her wide-open eyes, and as if asking without words, "Why did this happen?" Of course, she was too young to formulate such thoughts, but childish sensitivity does not allow her to be completely deceived. Every time I held her in my arms, I felt either a bitter feeling of guilt or a bright gratitude rolling inside in waves. Guilt for the fact that Rachel and I could not give her a happy family. Gratitude for the fact that I have it, and that for the sake of it, I am ready to change. Rachel often left for work. She got a job as an administrator at a local fitness club and left Amora with her parents. Thanks to my new schedule, I sometimes met her after my shift and took my daughter to my place for a few hours, or we walked together in the park. At such moments, we communicated quite peacefully, without caustic remarks. Maybe because after the breakup, we both felt something like freedom and realized, quarrel no need. Soon, however, I began to notice that the relationship between Thomas and Rachel was becoming more and more warm. At first, it was short glances, later joint trips. My guesses were confirmed when one day I came to visit them. Rachel's parents invited me to a family dinner in honor of her mother's birthday, and I found Thomas there. He sat on the couch, hugging Amora, and next to him was Rachel, smiling and calm. And in their glance at each other, there was such a warm, gentle note that I understood. They are together. The feeling was strange. I didn't feel jealous because my feelings for Rachel had long since cooled, but a prick of conscience, yes, it was. She found a man who, apparently, really cares about her. He can give her what I could not, and she seems to be happy with him. We locked eyes with Thomas. He pursed his lips slightly, as if asking if I would mind. But I nodded and even smiled at him. After all, if it makes Rachel happy, I have no right to object. At dinner, we sat almost opposite each other, and I noticed how her mother, Mary, looked at me and Thomas. Alternately mixed emotions were visible in her eyes. On the one hand, there is pain for the daughter's broken marriage. On the other, a certain cautious joy that this time there will be a person next to Rachel who can love her. The father, Walter, was reserved, but without obvious hostility. His stern face softened as he looked at Amora, who was sitting on Thomas's lap, babbling cheerfully. And then I realized, we are all trying to create a new form of family, where there are no husbands and wives in the usual sense, but there is common love for one child. And if it requires joint efforts, I'm ready. I haven't seen Liv for several weeks. I tried to focus on work, on my daughter, and push my feelings somewhere deep down. But she showed up and called one evening. "I want to come to you," she said briefly, without unnecessary explanation. I realized that she probably wanted to complete the dialogue that began in the park. Or, conversely, start it again. I agreed because I was no longer going to run from problems. This time she came to my home, without feigned insolence, without bright makeup and short skirts. Regular jeans, a sweater, minimal makeup on the face. She looked tired, and perhaps more sincere than ever. I made her tea, and we sat down at the kitchen table. We chatted for a few minutes about trifles, how work was, how the weather was, and our plans. Everything inside me was clenching with a premonition that the conversation would go in a serious direction. "Dan," Liv finally said, cupping her cup with her hands, "I thought about what you said in the park, and I realized something. My feelings for you are not just passion or attraction. It is rather a desire to make me noticed. I always felt like I wasn't good enough to be the center of someone else's world. I once thought that being bright and noisy meant people would love me. But over the years, I realized that it doesn't work." I listened in silence, feeling how her frankness touched me. I never thought of Liv as a person with deep-seated fears. She seemed to have confidence and fired herself. But apparently, underneath this shell, there was pain. "Forgive me," I said, and she looked surprised. "It's really my fault that I wasn't thinking about you or Rachel when I gave in to the impulse." She pressed her hand to her forehead, sighing softly. "I understand," Liv replied. We continued to talk about life, about the future. Liv admitted that she is also thinking about changing something in her career. She is tired of running from one job to another. She wants stability. For the first time, I saw in her not an adventuress, but a woman tired of the endless bustle. At some point, she said quietly, "You know, I can't promise that my feelings for you will disappear with the snap of a finger. But I decided that I would let the situation go. If one day we realize that we can be together, so be it. If not, then time will judge." I nodded, feeling both sad and relieved. Sadness that we were so messed up that we caused so much pain to each other and to Rachel. Relief from the fact that now there are no lies, no pretense between us. That evening she left without waiting for darkness, leaving behind a quiet whisper of perfume, which no longer seemed suffocatingly sweet to me as before. And for some reason, I felt that we had finally put some kind of period or ellipsis. In any case, I have stepped further along my path. I joined the team at Techmark Solutions gradually, but with a great desire to learn. My department colleagues, engineers, and developers were surprised at how quickly I grasped the material, but I understood. It was all my nerves and motivation. I literally wanted to prove that I was worth something, that I could be a better father to Amora. The probationary period flew by unnoticed. I sat over the drawings, studied technical documentation, and went on business trips to various production facilities where Techmark implemented automation systems. In the evenings, when there were hours of rest, I, if it coincided with the schedule, tried to be with my daughter. Otherwise, I read books on engineering, watched lectures on the internet, trying to fill the gaps in my education. Sometimes I would pass out right at my laptop and wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, remembering how much I hadn't done yet. But despite the fatigue, I felt satisfied. For the first time, I was walking towards a dream, rather than drifting with the flow of other people's decisions. Towards the end of the probationary period, Harry called me into his office. I walked there with my heart pounding, a decisive conversation. Upon entering, I saw him at the table, immersed in reports. He looked up at me and smiled. "Dan, I have good news for you. We have decided to take you on a permanent basis. Congratulations." I couldn't help but smile broadly. Joy raged inside me, mixed with relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. "Thank you. I am very happy and grateful to you, Harry, for giving me a chance." He nodded and twirled the pen in his hands. "You've already learned a lot, but there's still a lot of work ahead. We are ready to partially pay for your further education if you want to receive your diploma remotely or take evening courses. Yes, it will be difficult to combine, but we value specialists with fundamental knowledge." I was ready to grab this opportunity with both hands. "Of course, I agree," I answered enthusiastically. "I'll do whatever it takes." Leaving the office, I was wondering who to tell first about my success. Parents? Yes. Rachel? Probably too, because it means I can provide for Amora better. Thomas? I owe him the recommendation. And I suddenly remembered Liv. But I decided not to rush. For now, I just wanted to enjoy the thought that I now have a chance to realize myself in the business that I love. Over time, it became obvious that between Rachel and Thomas, there was not just sympathy, but a growing feeling. They no longer hid their relationship, and even Rachel's parents, who at first seemed confused, were now more calm about it. Apparently, they saw that Thomas respected their daughter, that she was calm and happy next to him. I often noticed the three of them walking together: Thomas, Rachel, and Amora. I won't lie, this sight evoked a complex cocktail of emotions in me. On the one hand, there is a pang of jealousy, not as a woman, but rather in the role of a father. Here he is leading my daughter by the hand, laughing with her. On the other hand, there is an understanding that I need to humble myself and see this as good. If Amora gets extra love, what's wrong with that? Sometimes I felt out of place, as if there was a new family and I was just a guest. But I tried to remind myself that I am still a dad, and that nothing will take away my love for my daughter and hers for me. One evening, Rachel called me. This has already become a rarity. We corresponded more often in instant messengers about the schedule and had almost no personal conversations. I heard her voice and realized that she sounded excited, but without the usual nervous anger. "Hi, Dan," she said. "I wanted to talk to you about Thomas." I was surprised, tensed. "Yes? Did something happen?" "No, everything is fine. He just invited me to live together. Amora and I have been with my parents for several months now, and frankly, it's time for us to live separately. Thomas wants the three of us to live together." A lump came to my throat. Three of us. My daughter, Rachel, and Thomas. That is, they begin a full-fledged family life without hiding it. I swallowed. "I understand. Why are you calling me?" There was an awkward hesitation in her voice. "I wanted to make sure you didn't mind. Of course, I don't have to ask permission, but nevertheless, you are Amora's father, and it is important to me that calm reigns between all of us. I don't want you to feel like you're being pushed out." I closed my eyes, pressing the phone closer to my ear for a moment. No matter how painful it was, I understood that this was right. She doesn't have to spend her life in her parents' house, and Thomas can really give her support and love. "I don't mind," I said in a calm tone, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "If Amore is nice and calm there, I'm all for it. You know, I am ready to help financially, and I can take her to my place at any time if you need time for two." "Thank you," Rachel breathed heartily. "I appreciate it, Dan." We talked a little more about the details, about the fact that I can still come whenever I want, having agreed in advance. I felt her voice warm up. Maybe now that she has gained a sense of security and love, it is easier for her to communicate with me, or maybe she's just grown up about it all. Be that as it may, I felt that everything was in its place. Time passed quickly. The first year after Rachel and I separated was a year of change, pain, and growth. I managed to get an internship and established myself at Techmark Solutions. Moreover, with the help of Harry and another curator, he began to complete his studies in absentia in order to receive a diploma. At the same time, I was working at the same time, and sometimes doing part-time work on weekends. We saw our daughter regularly. At least 2 or 3 times a week, I took her to my place, and sometimes Thomas himself brought her if Rachel was busy. Amora grew up, and every month it became clear that she was very inquisitive, with a lively mind. She loved to listen when I said that Dad builds cars, and she also adored it when we together invented something from scrap materials, collected crafts, painted. My house was gradually filled with her drawings, small things that she left when she came to me. Rachel was settling into her life with Thomas. Sometimes I visited them, often for Amora, less often just for fun, and I was greeted by a warm, homely atmosphere. At such moments, I realized that perhaps this is exactly what a real family should look like: mutual support, smiles, calmness, without the eternal hassle that we had. And if that makes Rachel happy, then I have no right to feel jealous. On the contrary, we both wished ourselves and each other happiness, even if separately. During this year, Liv and I saw each other only a couple of times. We crossed paths in the company of mutual friends. She looked more subdued, but still vibrant. I noticed timid hope in her gaze, but no longer passionate expectation. Each time we nodded politely to each other, exchanged a few words, and I saw that she kept her distance. She was probably afraid of hurting me or didn't want to hurt herself. But one day, when almost a year had passed since Rachel and I broke up, I ran into Liv in the supermarket. She stood at the vegetable rack, choosing tomatoes. I came up from behind and gently touched her shoulder. "Hello." She turned around, and something like bewildered joy flashed on her face. "Hello, Dan. How are you?" We quietly stepped aside so as not to disturb other customers, and a short conversation ensued. It turned out that Liv got a job as an administrator at a restaurant. I said that everything was working out for me. A new job, studying, my daughter is growing up. "Maybe we can have coffee sometime," I unexpectedly suggested, although I myself did not expect that I would decide. Not as a date, but as friends who haven't seen each other for a long time. She looked at me, and her eyes smiled, although her lips remained calm. I'll be glad." We exchanged phone numbers, and I felt that there was something in the air similar to soft sympathy, but without the toxic passion that burned us once. Maybe this is the beginning of normal human relationships without false illusions. A year and a half later, I looked at our new life and sometimes wondered how intricately intertwined our paths were. We got an amazing puzzle. Rachel and Thomas live together and raise Amora. Rachel's look shows that she is satisfied with life, she is happy. Thomas puts his soul into their comfort, supports Amora, and financially provides well for his family. I see Amora regularly and have become closer to my dream of engineering. My work schedule is very busy, but I am happy that I can give my daughter both material and emotional support. I often tell her that I love her, hug her, read fairy tales, put her to bed on the days when she spends the night with me. My parents, they, of course, were upset, watching how my life had turned out before, but seeing that I eventually found my way and did not abandon Amora, they learned to accept everything as it is. Mom sometimes happily babysits when she needs help. Father is tactfully silent, but I see that he is glad that I really came to my senses, learned to be a man, take responsibility for my decisions. I was able to establish a career and stopped living in aimless chaos. Rachel's parents are Walter and Mary. They also accepted that we are not together, but they respect my rights as a father. Walter is still stern, but when he sees me, he makes it clear that he appreciates that I regularly participate in my daughter's life. Mary is now more concerned about whether Rachel and Thomas are doing well, and seems to see that they have strong feelings even without the lavish weddings. Liv gradually entered my life as a friend. We became real friends, without sexual overtones, without hidden desire. We went to a cafe a couple of times where we discussed our internal transformations. She found a psychologist, works and reads books on self-development. Sometimes he jokingly calls me his mentor, to which I just laugh and wave my hand. Come on, what kind of mentors are I? But I see that she looks at me warmer than just an acquaintance. And yet, we have not yet crossed the boundaries of friendship. Maybe we both decided that time would put everything in its place. Sometimes people are surprised. How do we all manage to communicate without turning into mutual squabbles? After all, this is such a complex knot. But we just don't want any more pain, not for ourselves or for our daughter. For her sake, we all try to behave in a civilized manner, but it turns out that this also has its own happiness. When you let go of old grievances, you understand that the world is wider than the black and white division into good and bad. On Amora's birthday, we had a small celebration in the backyard of Rachel's parents' house. There was a lawn where you could put tables, balls, and children's attractions. Family, friends, and relatives came. Liv, my parents, and Thomas and Rachel were there as the hosts of the site. When I saw Amora in a festive dress, with ponytails on her head, running towards me shouting, "Daddy," my heart almost burst with tenderness. I picked her up in my arms, spun her around, and she laughed loudly, exuding sincere childish happiness. She was the center of attention, but at the same time she was not capricious at all. She easily switched from my hugs to Thomas's, then to her grandparents, and I realized she is growing in an atmosphere where she has truly loved everyone who is in her life. Yes, we do not have a traditional unit of society, but there is unanimity that for the sake of this girl, we will be friends at home. In the evening, when the guests began to slowly leave, and the child, having played enough, almost fell asleep right at the table, I noticed that Liv was leaving, waving at me from afar. I caught up with her at the gate. "Thank you for coming," I said, trying to be heard above the noise of the street. She smiled, throwing her bag over her shoulder. We froze for a second, looking at each other. I suddenly remembered our first meeting, when she was so provocative that I could not understand how Rachel was friends with her. And now she stood in front of me, calm, warm, completely different. "Dan," she said quietly, looking down, "I know that this year has not been easy for you, but I'm glad that you coped with it, that everything is getting better for you." I smiled, breathing in the cool evening air. "I'm glad too. Thank you for not turning your back on me after everything." A soft sadness flashed in her eyes. She took a step towards me, and there were only a couple of centimeters between us. I felt her warm breath, the smell of familiar perfume, but not painfully sweet sin, but something more subtle, gentle. We stood there for another minute, without words. Then I leaned down and carefully touched her cheek with my lips, a light, warm kiss, without passionate overtones, more like gratitude and a promise. She closed her eyes, as if remembering the touch. "I have to go," she whispered. "Shall we ride off?" I nodded, unable to say anything more. I watched her walk away along the street lit by a lantern, leaving a thin trail of perfume behind her. Sometimes people ask me, "Aren't you afraid that the child will grow up in the wrong family where mom and dad are not together?" But I answer, the thing to be afraid of is that a child grows up in an atmosphere of hatred and hostility, but we have peace and love from all participants. We made sure that Amora never felt deprived for a second. Yes, we once made a mess of things, our marriage, on the fly, our scandals, insults. But now, looking back, I see that each of us has gone through the path of growing up. We learn to speak, admit mistakes, not blame each other, but bear responsibility. And most importantly, at the center of this complex structure is a little girl named Amora, whose name means love. And it seems that she is really growing in love. Sometimes I still wonder, what would have happened if Rachel and I had not gotten married then, but remained just parents? Maybe we could save each other a lot of pain, but perhaps this is pointless. The past cannot be changed. After all, love is not always a romantic fairy tale for two. Sometimes love is a wide, complex world where people learn to forgive, part, change, and at the same time remain part of each other, at least through a child who grows up in an atmosphere of trust and warmth. And I believe that when Amora gets older and asks, "Why aren't you and mommy together?" we can tell her honestly, "We weren't happy with each other as a couple, but we really wanted to be good parents, and we did everything to make you feel our love." Perhaps this is precisely what is important. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one, If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.